Julia Roig, today's guest, is the founder and chief network weaver of the Horizons Project. She has more than 25 years of experience working in conflict transformation and peace building. She is best known for her ability to convene diverse coalitions and her leadership of global networks. She'll also share insights about her superpower. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. Welcome to the Superpowers for Good show. Julia, thank you so much for joining me for this important conversation. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Devin. This is really fun for me to participate. I really appreciate being invited.
Well, this is an important conversation. These are stressful times for a lot of people in a lot of ways. And I think we're all trying to make sense of this. And for some of us, amateurs like me, we need professional peace builders like you to guide us. Before we jump into some of my angst, please don't think of me as, I want to think of you as my therapist. I'm going to try not to do that. But I want you to help us think through some of the stressors that we're all experiencing and how to cope and how to be more peace positive in our activities every day. But let's start by having you explain your current project, the Horizons Project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you for that. And, it's interesting because, words matter a lot. So when you just described, like, you're a professional peace builder, what I find often is, people have kind of an image in their head of what that even means. And the definitions of myself over the years have really changed. And so with this new project, the Horizons Project that I just started with some colleagues over the last year and a half is, as I think the name hopefully signifies, very focused on the future. Where are we going? Which gives us a sense of a kind of a collective shared vision and story that we're going to be able to tell ourselves. And so the Horizons Project is really an organizing platform. We're not a non-for-profit. We've set ourselves up as a small team to be really trying to establish connective tissue between a lot of other people doing really good work. And there's a lot of different definitions of what a peace builder is. You may think that it's somebody who works on violent conflict, somebody who's working to end war. I often think about peace builders as connective tissue between disparate perspectives, disparate concerns, different worldviews, because that's something that we call positive peace. We're not necessarily just trying to end violence and the perception of violence. We're really trying to create the conditions that keep us more peaceful as a society. And so the Horizons Project is just a wonderful space of connecting people that really need to be connected at this moment with all of the tensions and the differences that we come at the world's problems with, because we all are making sense in different ways. And so I think the tools that a peace builder uses of empathy, of active listening, of meeting people where they are, is a part of the facilitation work that we're doing at the Horizons Project now.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you would take a minute to walk us through that. Just give us a sense of the day-to-day activities of the Horizons Project and help us understand what you're doing.
Yeah, I find it very difficult to explain sometimes. I mean, whether it's my parents or my my cousin, who lives out in Eastern Oregon, like, what do you do again? It sounds so, and then the day to day, I mean, what is organizing work at its heart is building relationships with people. And so my daily life really looks like talking to a lot of different people about what they're doing, what their vision of the problem is, what their concerns are, what their fears are, where they feel like there's gaps that they don't have access. And, so organizing work just looks like, in this day and age, a lot of Zoom calls.
Yeah.
But we really try as a team to participate in as many networks as we can. So if other people are convening conversations, whether it's about issues as diverse as racial justice, about the connection between generations, how do young people work with old people? I deal with a lot of different, we call them pillars of support to democracy. So there's a business pillar, there's a media pillar, there's a religious institutions pillar. And so I sit in on a lot of network discussions. But I'll give you an example. I finally had an in-person meeting yesterday. I don't get to go to a lot of coalition meetings in person, but just yesterday I got to participate in a group of bridge builders. They call themselves bridge builders. That's their title. And they have a national council of bridge builders. And so I participated as a peace builder because I've got a different name. That's why I was talking about how words matter. And we just defined how we define our work, how we define ourselves, what our priorities are, where is there overlap, where is there not, how do we need to kind of align or find common ground, and where are there natural tensions. So, I get paid to talk to a lot of really interesting people. And then I spend a lot of time reading. I read stuff and then I share things that I think are super interesting and cool. So people who
Yeah.
know me know that I'm like an obsessive sharer of cool stuff that I think people should read. Sometimes it's overwhelming. And so if I send
Yeah.
10 articles, they'll come back to me and say, which is the one article I should read?
Yeah. That's great. That's great. As I think about the situation I see today in the United States, I look uh, at January 6th, 2021, as kind of a scary event.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was, I realize different people have different perspectives. They like to use different words to describe it, but it was clearly violent, objectively violent. Uh, I think it is accurately described as an insurrection, right? That there were people there trying to prevent Congress from taking a vote, uh, essentially formalize Joe Biden's victory in the election. And it's hard for me to articulate my views about what happened that day without offending people who are sympathetic
Mm-hmm.
to what happened on that day.
Yeah.
And I use this example to and context because I think the issue really isn't resolved in America, right? We haven't found unanimity around this. I have many friends who I think, we're this close to going on January 6th and might go the next time. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it scares me. Uh,
Yeah.
but I don't want to be contributing to raising their anger. I don't want to contribute to having them buy more ammo, right? I want to dial down the peace. But I also don't want to legitimize insurrection. Guide me. And I think there are a lot of people who feel
Yeah.
this angst. They're looking for somebody to help us figure out how to talk about this in a way that doesn't inflame the passions, dials them down, but doesn't allow for, doesn't in some way condone. Help
Right.
me out.
Well, I think first and foremost, it's important to acknowledge that painful experience that you're having, the confusion. And there's confusion everywhere. Everyone's confused. We don't know what to believe. We don't know what's true. And at the same time, what we are experiencing in the United States is actually falling quite is tracking pretty closely along an authoritarian playbook. And so we really do have a faction in the United States right now that is trying to subvert democracy. And it's not one person, it's not one politician, it is a system that is right now happens to be a faction within the Republican Party. Under Jim Crow, that faction was in the Democratic Party. But one of the very clear uh, tactics of any authoritarian rule is to keep us divided and to keep us confused and to not know what's true. And so there's a couple of things that I would say. One is that we quite honestly need to face up to the level of threat. And I think that we have had a democracy for more than 200 years. And so we don't think it can happen here, that we could lose it. And actually we came close, and we eventually had a transition of power. But the problem is metastasized, and it's now at the state level. And it shows up in a lot of different ways. And it shows up not just in kind of voting rights and all of the kind of politics, but it shows up in the way that we're so polarized we can't have those conversations anymore with each other. And so there's two things that I would say. One is we can't necessarily blame those who are swimming in a sea of misinformation, because truly, it's not just the media, but the media is a pillar of support. And so, do you hate them, or does your heart bleed for them? Really? And so how to have these conversations then is a lot of practice of calling in versus calling out. And I don't know if you've engaged at all with the work of Loretta Ross, who's a professor at Smith College, who has a wonderful TED Talk if you're a TED Talk consumer. And, I think part of the answer is to not necessarily talk about January 6th, quite honestly, to find each other's humanity. Again, there's a lot of groups that are focused on that, because part of why we're so divided is because we feel shamed. There's a sea of outrage. And so actually, when you hear we don't want to necessarily give rise to the belief around January 6th. But if somebody believes in that, it's one, we all have stacked identities. It's one aspect of them. And so I really do think we need to have an invitation of belonging, because a lot of the dynamics that are pulling us apart right now is just a sense of just exclusion, right, on all sides, and competitive victimhood, but we also need to work like heck to protect our democracy. And there's a whole bunch of work on social norms that I'd love to. I don't want to get too academic on you, but if and when our in-group, we see our in-group behaving in a different way, our norms start to change. And right now, our norms are very grounded in outrage. But there's a whole exhausted middle who just is keeping their head down, which is another part of authoritarianism, isn't it? We all start keeping quiet, because if not, we're going to get our heads chopped off, because our in-groups are going to get so angry at us. So, you just have to find something. You have to find another connection, and find something to work on together that isn't just about arguing about these truths that people have a totally different sense of reality right now, unfortunately.
Yeah. I guess maybe part of what you're saying is that maybe I'm not doing such a bad job. I'm a member of a Rotary Club. We do a lot of service in the community. We raised tens of thousands of dollars for a variety of causes, including especially supporting some food banks in our community. We routinely build wheelchair ramps for folks who need them at their homes. Um, but the club does a lot of stuff. Rotary International does a lot of good as well. I'm proud to be a Rotarian. But a lot of the people in my current club are folks who I think, are this close to saddling up for the next January 6th.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a weird thing. But I think part of what I hear you saying is that by engaging with them across other things and leaving the politics aside for a while, we build relationships that make it just a little bit harder for them to show up at the next of January 6th, because they know one of the people that they would be working against quite violently would be their buddy Devin from the Rotary Club.
Yeah.
Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring up Rotary. We work very closely with Rotary International at the Horizons Project, and one of the projects that we're working on with them is the difference between good polarization and toxic polarization, and how that shows up in the life of Rotary. Because Rotary has a whole, and there's a whole bunch of organizations doing very good work for their for their community, and we get a little worried when we see those who are raising the heat. So whether it's a Black Lives Matter movement, whether it's climate change, whether it's now an abortion rights movement, there's a world where we polarize to organize. And I think that that's a little unsettling. Rotary doesn't feel super comfortable with that. And yet, part of being a service organization, I think, part of being a member of the community, and I think what you're talking about is very local level stitching together those relationships, because you really want to be able to see that humanity in kind of who you consider the other side. And yet we've got to tie all that service work to justice work. And that seems very politicized right now. And so what does it look like to think about the systemic change? Because you could be working for, a food bank, but you can also be working with your city with regards to food insecurity policies that you want to see changed. And so I think
Yeah.
that there's kind of also recognizing that maybe Rotary doesn't have to do that, but some Rotary members might be connected with some groups who are also working to really deal with systemic injustice. Now, with that said, that's good polarization, because we want to we want to raise the heat so that complacency about food insecurity isn't tolerated anymore in your small community.
Yeah.
And so there's a way that Rotary comes together, but then is also really contributing to the long-term change. Now, toxic polarization, when does it tip over into toxicity or acute polarization? And that's when you see othering and dehumanizing language. And so, if that's when the calling in and calling out strategies really work, because all those liberals, they're all communists. All those Trump lovers, they're all fascists, they're Nazis. And so when we hear gross generalizations, we have to call in our community members and say, well, actually, and there's strategies to do that. I know that really good people on both sides, and you don't want to shame people. And I think that that's really the vicious cycle we're in right now, is when we hear language of othering, we jump on it with a lot of anger, and we shame people, and they become even more they cleave even more to their in-group. So it doesn't work that well. So I think that there are ways of having these kind of quiet conversations about who Rotary, wants to be. Because what I love about Rotary is that you've got a superordinate identity as Rotarians. And that
Hmm.
four-way test is beautiful. And I think that we're looking for that right now, a superordinate identity, because our partisan identity is taken over in this polarized moment. So that's why I was talking about stacked identities.
Yeah.
And so you meet those conversations with empathy and with love, dare I say. I know that sounds
Yeah.
mushy, but that's true.
Yeah.
People that you care about, and we're all complex. We're complex people.
Yeah. In 2020, I ran for Congress, and I became aware from a fresh perspective, right, of something that I hadn't fully appreciated. But being a partisan guy, uh, I was well accustomed to um, seeing and making some rather accusatory blanket statements about the other guys. And I was very attuned to the blanket statements against me. You alluded to them, right? Sometimes we call all Trump supporters Nazis. Sometimes Republicans call Democrats socialists or communists. Um, those are absurd blanket statements. Um, and they don't serve anyone any good. And then there are, personal attacks in politics as well
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
sometimes get out of hand. Um, how do we have, how do you coach people to be thoughtful politicians? Because they're such leaders. I mean, like it or not, they're leaders, right? How do we engage in political discourse in such a way that we can make a point that's valid, that's important, that needs to be said without resorting to language that is too broad and unfair, but is designed to fire up the base, right? How do we do it?
Well, context is everything, isn't it? And I think that we really need a movement in the United States that calls for a different kind of leadership because we get the leaders we deserve. And we are, I mean, just yesterday in the bridging conversation we were having is Washington D.C. reactive or is it causal? And are we saying that our national politics are so broken that somehow we're crumbling as a society, the social cohesion, our social fabric, or is our social fabric crumbled and then therefore we have these leaders and then all of the kind of social media and information, the media, um, and we need to feel a sense of agency again. And so I do think that there is a higher level of accountability for leaders. And so one of the things that we're really working on at the Horizons Project is a strategy around what is this vision that we want in our democracy, where we trust our institutions, that we're going to make sure that we won't stand for leaders who are othering and dehumanizing. And that includes businesses, and that's above partisan identity. It should be on all sides. Now, with that said, when we're firing up the base, we fire up the base based on a common vision. And I think that that's where we've kind of fallen down. We have only two parties, which means that, our kind of big tent approach, you've experienced this, wrangling the diversity. So, there's some very interesting, institutional reforms on the table with regards to like, let's break it up into a four-party system. What would that look like? Ranked choice voting, what would that look like, making us more civil? But it's also up to us to say and to organize to say we don't like this, we don't want this language, and you can fire up your base based on a future vision of what you're for and not necessarily what you're against. And there is research that works. And so unfortunately, there's an incentive structure right now, because we're all marinating in this, outrage feels very good, by the way. You know that, right? We're all flooded with the kind of love hormone that makes us feel closer to our in group when we feel outraged together. We are more
Yeah.
together when we're outraged. So we need to disenthrall ourselves from the outrage, and we need to find that kind of common cause. And it's okay that people think differently, that we come to different policy solutions. We just need to get back to deliberation and being able to actually discuss policy choices, because we're not doing much of that right now. And I really think it's going to take a movement of people that say enough is enough. There's
Yeah.
more of us, actually. I really believe that. There's more of us that want a different citizenry, a different politic. We just have to get a little more active about it. And your Rotary Club is a good start. What do we stand for? Do we want to stand for, the values of Rotary? Let's start working more towards that.
Yeah. Great point. Julia, what's your superpower?
Oh, what is my superpower? Right now, I feel like my superpower is just embracing complexity. I know that sounds very high-minded. If I could I fly? Could I be invisible? But I think sitting with uncertainty, sitting with ambiguity, recognizing how complex the world is, and letting it be both and. You can be both traumatized and exhausted, and you can feel hope in the future, that you see your 21-year-old daughter and how engaged she is, and you can feel worried, and you still have agency to make a difference. And so I think the superpower that we need right now is to sit with complexity and still act. And so I really want to instill in people a sense of agency, even in the chaos.
That's a brilliant observation and a great superpower. Um, I want you to think if you can identify a time when you utilized that superpower and achieved some outcome that you're proud of. Uh, Maybe it was just in a simple conversation. Maybe it was pulling off a big event. Maybe it was, a I don't know, a détente of some sort. To give us an example of when that actually came into play.
Yeah. I mean, I'd probably, if I had more time to think about it, I could come up with a better example. But this is what I'm thinking about right now is,
Mhm.
I really do believe in the power of convening people who should meet each other and wrestle with tensions. Because part of what we need to do right now, and I might have said this already, is just we need to hold up a mirror to ourselves. And so recently we've been gathering a group of social justice activists, people who are really on the kind of, let's say, radical side of the spectrum, and a group of peace builders, who may say we want to like dial down the tension, and talking about facilitating a conversation that was quite painful because it was right around, just whether it was Black Lives Matter, whether it was some of the like police reform discussions, whether it was the Supreme Court justice nominee that just went through. Feelings are intense. And so with our social justice colleagues, hearing about the strategy of wanting to maintain relationships with, let's say, more center right, even far right colleagues that peace builders were expressing, why it was important to them to have the legitimacy to convene the other side, and the hurt that felt, that means that you're not in solidarity with me. And we facilitated those conversations. And And what I've experienced when you bring complexity into the room, to say both of your strategies can be true, both of your feelings can be true, and we need both. We need the bridge builders to maintain that link, and it doesn't mean that your issue isn't important to me, and I care about you, and I value you and your work, and I hear what you're saying. And there's a bit of an aha moment, I think, for my peace building friends, that neutrality is not what is called for in this moment. And that was a big aha moment for my peace building friends. And there's a wonderful book called The Neutrality Trap by Bernie Mayer, a real icon in the peace building conflict resolution field. And so what I'm really proud of is that there's an aha moment of what neutrality costs us sometimes as peace builders. And that we need a little bit more of the solidarity, and yet still being able to maintain the relationships with others. So that's a really complex conversation. And all of these different perspectives can be true within one system trying to make change in the country.
That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. Now, one final question of substance here. As you think about your superpower of being able to, cope with, live in complexity, accept complexity, how would you coach others to develop that skill even a little bit? How do we begin? Because a lot of us spend our time trying to simplify life, to make it clear, divide it into simple black and white. It's a reversal, really, for us to say, no, I want to understand, appreciate, and embrace complexity. How do we do that?
Yeah, it's a really great question, but it's something I'm really committed to right now, because I do think that our whole education system needs to adapt to this future, because we will never have the full picture of any problem we're trying to solve unless, we work in aerospace science and we're building a plane, and there's a very clear answer to that question. And so, there's a lot of different tools around actually just sense making. So complexity is tied to sense making, which people, when I was talking to a friend recently in my church community, she said, sense making, like 2 cents, like CENTS. And then I
Right.
realized this is very jargony when I say sense making. No, I mean, how are we making sense of the world? And so I have been asking other leaders, well, how do you do it? And I think that there's an aspect of, observation, of making sure that there's a diversity of sources that you consult, that you read. If that's, you listen to podcasts, you make sure there's a lot, you're in a lot of different communities of practice, let's say. But what I found really interesting about some of the practices was a lot of also just quiet time to just listen to, almost hear your own thoughts. And I know that sounds really maybe woo woo, too much kind of yoga mindfulness, but I actually believe that. I believe that a practice of complexity is just sitting in quiet to hear yourself think sometimes, and letting the worry and the bigness of the problems wash over you, and then letting it be okay. And then, of course, being in relationships with others, because we can only make sense of the world with other people. So you find your community and you talk with them about how they're making sense of things right now. And that diversity of the community, because they also then are going to have your back if you engage with whatever you want to engage with. Very complex, very difficult, and we might make mistakes. Might not go really well. So then we also have to be forgiving of each other in this moment, because we do the best we can with the information we have.
Yeah. Great guidance. Well, Julia, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Before we wrap up, would you take a minute and tell people how they can learn more about the Horizons Project and how they can connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, definitely our website is the good place to start, and you can find us at horizonsproject.us. We have a regular newsletter that comes out, which is a compilation of materials that we curate, essentially, wanting to share all this great sense making stuff to try and kind of put some new ideas in folks' heads. I'm always interested in people reaching out to me and by email or by LinkedIn, and just sharing thoughts and networking with each other. And we have a lot of events that we also, so our website is just chock full of some of those resources, and then webinars that we've produced in the past. So definitely, please be in touch. We're only going to get through this if we do it together.
Fantastic. Well, Julia, thank you so much for joining me today and being with us. We're grateful for your time, and we want to wish you every success in your efforts to help create more peace on Earth. My heavens, we need it.
Thank you.
So we wish you luck.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you're doing too, Devin. You're a great connector as well.
All righty. Thank you. Now, let's do some good. Thank you for tuning in to the Superpowers for Good show. Twice each week, we host changemakers who share their impact, insights, and superpowers. Don't miss another episode. Subscribe today at superpowersforgood.com. That's superpowers, 4, good.com. Be super empowered. Get your copy of the book, Superpowers for Good, as an ebook, audiobook, paperback, or hardcover edition via your favorite online retailer. Interested in having me speak to your company, organization, or association? Visit devinthorpe.com. Then let's talk. Now, keep using your superpowers for good. Together, we can reverse climate change, improve global health, and eradicate poverty.